So that's good. I think people do know now that we're looking at some revisions to Class K. So I think that's why finally we're getting some input from members of the public, and we do have quite a bit of correspondence that we will be talking about this morning. I think some of the people who sent that correspondence, fortunately, are here and can speak to the standing committee. Just so folks understand, Supervisor McCowan and I, as much as we'd like to, are not the decision makers on this. What we'll do is make a recommendation, hopefully a pretty unified recommendation, as unified as possible, to the Board of Supes, and then the entire board will make any ordinance revisions that are called for. I think everybody in this room probably knows that Class K goes back to 1982. Am I right? 2 or 3? I think it was 82. And
You were there?
I know I was there, but that doesn't mean I remember. It's kind of like the 60s, you know, if you remember it, you weren't there. But the 80s were, really falling directly in the wake of, or coming directly in the wake of Clean Slate. We came up with the Class K ordinance. And of course, there was kind of a statewide phenomenon going on then. We were not the only county that was having folks go back to the land and trying to shelter themselves. And, many people in this room, or maybe even people listening to this, remember the building code wars of the late 70s and early 80s. And Clean Slate and Class K played a big part in creating some measure of peace in the county. And I don't think it's the intention of the standing committee, and I'll just take the liberty to speak for Supervisor McCowan, want to get rid of Class K. We still see a purpose for Class K, but it was pointed out to me some months ago that an ordinance that was passed in 1982 based on a 1976 UBC, Uniform Building Code, or California Building Code, had not been revised in 40-some years. Meanwhile, of course, the building codes have changed and changed and changed many times. And then the other thing that was brought up to me, and this came from the local builders exchange, was that what at least I had thought, and I think a lot of people had thought back in the day of Class K being passed, what we thought the purpose of the ordinance was, which was limited density, rural dwellings, mostly owner-built, or at least there was that owner-built kind of overtone to it, and mostly smaller dwellings, had morphed into something where people were coming in with plans for 8 and 10 and 12,000 square foot homes and doing them under Class K. And is that wrong? I mean, I was talking to one of the people who will address us later, who was saying, what difference does it make? I mean, why shouldn't people who build huge homes be, and maybe there's a good argument to be made there, but I do know that at least back in the day, that was not the intention. We called Class K, the euphemism was the cabin code. And it was really for people who wanted to build a shelter and be able to subsist in that shelter, not for people building, huge homes on more urbanized lots. Some of the input that has come in over the weekend contained information that that is not necessarily true, and I'm sure there's a lot of rumors out there about what we are doing and aren't doing with Class K, and I think all that'll come out today in our discussions. And with that, I think maybe we can get to it, unless my colleague has any opening remarks before we go to staff.
I would just say, first of all, I do concur with everything Supervisor Hamburg has said, and in particular his comments regarding that originally Class K was limited density, rural, generally owner-built, mostly small. The idea, I think, was that property owners would be able to build an affordable structure, and that this was a way to help them be able to do that. And it's kind of morphed into something else where we see 10,000 square foot dwellings being built under Class K. That's doesn't exactly meet my definition of affordable. So I appreciate very much the comments. I think we're going to have a pretty good discussion here. Supervisor Hamburg and I previously gave direction on a number of items that involved a little give and take by each of us to arrive at a consensus so far, I believe. And whether at the end of the discussion today we're still all in agreement on all of those points or not, I expect we will forward this to the board for their consideration. And almost every one of these points involves policy decisions that obviously I think the full board is going to want to weigh in on. So that's all I have now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. With that, I want to welcome Nash Gonzalez, who is our, thank you very much, who is our Director of Planning and Building, and also our Planning Director, Mike Oliphant. And I think Mike's going to start off with some remarks, sort of catching us up on where we were. You know, we had, I think, 3 meetings on this in the committee, and then the fires happened, and everything kind of, you know, went toward dealing with all the aftermath of the fires. So we're just kind of getting back to Class K, and I thought it'd be instructive for our building official to kind of catch us up on where we were at that point and what will be our starting point today. Mike.
Good morning, members of the board. Mike Oliphant, building official. I'll start at the beginning. Class K, the regulations for limited density rural dwellings, was first adopted in 1981. And so here we are considering proposed revisions to the Class K ordinance. There are basically 6 items that are under current consideration. And I presented these on September 25th to the board, and then shortly thereafter the fires happened, and like Supervisor Hamburg said, the fires happened and we had a big interruption, very unfortunately. The first proposed revision is that all new single-family residences will be required to have fire sprinklers. And we need to remember that we're talking about new single-family residences, not existing structures. A new single-family residence shall be limited to 2,000 square feet of habitable space. Wildland urban interface, otherwise known as WUI requirement, shall be required for all new single-family residential structures. That involves all siding materials and window treatments and covered soffits, and does involve many types of siding. A perimeter foundation, as required by the California Building Code, shall be required under single-family residential habitable structures and accessory structures greater than 1 story in height. And just briefly, the reason that the perimeter foundation is in there for habitable structures are for basic engineering principles of transferring shear, seismic, and wind loads to the foundation. Now, a perimeter foundation would be allowed on a new single-family residence with proper design analysis by an architect or engineer. The next one, a minimum parcel size of 5 acres.
Excuse me, Mike. Let me just make sure I understand that. You're saying that a perimeter foundation would be required for the SFR, the single-family residence, and what would be the exception to that? Something that was engineered that was different than that.
So if you have a design professional such as an engineer and architect design your foundation, you may have an alternative foundation such as a post and pier. But they're the ones who calculate the transfer of the winded load and seismic designs to the foundation.
So would you see that the current section, which is 18.23.330, would remain in the ordinance?
No, it would not. It would be struck out, and it would say that all new single-family residences, habitable space, would need to comply with minimum standards and would require a perimeter footing and stem wall foundation.
But you're saying there's also this exception for using other types of foundations if those are, if the evidence is presented by an engineer?
By an engineer and architect. And currently,
Architect.
that's how we handle all foundations currently. We have for many years out of the Title 24 building code.
Okay.
We're just merely moving the minimum building code standards for the foundation into this Class K ordinance.
Okay.
That's my proposal. The
Yeah.
next one is a minimum parcel size of 5 acres shall be required for any structure. And then the last proposal is a minimum of 3 inspections shall occur on all structures. That is a foundation inspection, a rough-in inspection, which involves framing, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and then lastly, a final inspection. That's 3 inspections total. And those are my proposals for the Class K ordinance.
Questions? Yeah.
Well, I would just say you're calling them your proposals, but I believe they reflect the recommendations of the committee to this point.
I'm sorry, that you're absolutely correct. Right.
So they can blame us.
Yeah, and you know, as far as I'm concerned, they're also not written in stone. I mean, that's what we're doing here today, is we're looking at this anew. But I do agree
Correct.
with John that we did consent on those. So with that, yes, Mr. Gonzalez, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the board.
Yeah.
Before the fires occurred, we had extensive meetings with the fire chiefs. We had spoken with various fire officials, and a lot of their concerns were centered around what happened on October 9th. And we had started talking about some of the fire safe, some of the wildland interface issues and so on. They understood that Class K was an alternative, that it was there to assist folks. And again, in 1981, when this was conceived, it was, as you pointed, Supervisor Hamburg, it was a way to create an opportunity to create these affordable housing units. But since then, we've had a lot of changes in the building code. We've had changes in what's occurring around us. And so for these reasons, this is why these recommendations are put forward. But again, it'll be up to this committee to make a recommendation to the board based on what's happened. But some of the things I want to share with you over the years of folks coming to me and talking to me about both Clean Slate and Class K is that they feel it was a good thing at the time that they went through the process, and a lot of them say that they probably would not have had a change of heart. But some of them actually have found that as they go try to obtain insurance or try to refinance their properties, they've also had a difficult time in doing that. And so a lot of them have said that as long as those services are available to them, they obviously welcome this program. But the ones that had difficulty, wanted to express their frustration. They said it really wasn't the county's fault. It was just something that they chose to go down a certain path. And I'm not sure if you folks have heard anything otherwise, but these are just things that I've heard over the years as to some of the difficulties because of these types of things that aren't in the code or in Class K at this point in time, especially dealing with fires. And I just wanted to throw that out as far as how some people are looking at this.
Well, it seems pretty self-evident that given what Northern California has gone through with these wildfires, and of course now it's in Southern California, but it's going to become that much more difficult for people to obtain financing and obtain insurance quotes if they don't have fire safe measures in their structure. On the other hand, everybody in Mendocino County who pays any attention to housing knows we have an affordability crisis, and it's just trying to balance two things that are very, very difficult. I mean, we all would like to live in perfect houses that are perfectly safe in every condition. And boy, if these wildfires told us one thing, it seems to me that even if your house had a world-class sprinkler system, you probably would still have been, your home would probably still have been consumed in these wildfires. Would you like to dispute that?
No, I would just
Mr.
like
Oliphant?
I would just like to comment on that,
Okay.
Mike Oliphant, building official. That is that fire sprinklers are not designed to stop a fire. They're designed to allow the occupants to get out of the
get
home
out of the home.
safely. The WUI requirements are designed to slow down the fire or potentially stop the fire at the exterior.
Right. Thank you. Yes, John?
I agree with your comments again. The fire safe standards may have helped in some cases. In many cases, there was simply nothing was going to slow down that fire under the conditions that were operative, but that's kind of a once in a generation or two event, hopefully. I also agree with your comments that the Class K, it may help people get into a structure. It may later create problems for financing and insurance, and so striking the balance is an issue. And then another issue that came up last time was I believe we had requested that county council would, and staff, I think we made directives to both, to examine to what degree is the county able to exempt new construction from the fire safe standards, or is that something that, since Class K was first initiated here, that the state has occupied more of the field to where there is limited leeway to exempt new primary dwellings, new dwelling units from the fire safe standards? And I don't know if we have information on that or not, but that's obviously part of the discussion.
Well, I think this would be a good time to ask county council for any input she has on that.
So thank you, Catherine Elliott, County Council. I did check in with Mr. Kudrowski just to see where he's at on this. So far, we're not really finding an exception in terms of going forward. He has not completed his investigation. My understanding is this will be coming back to the full board, and he assures me he will have an answer by that point.
John?
And the comment thus far not finding an exception would indicate that, as far as we know, the county may well lack an ability to exempt new construction from the fire safe standards.
That's what it's looking like so far.
And I wonder if we might ask if our building official
Yeah.
has an opinion.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add to that question, do we know of any counties, of the 58 counties in the state, that are making the kinds of exceptions that we might want to consider here?
So,
Yeah.
and I will tell you that Mr. Kudrowski is looking specifically at that, and that is actually where he's gaining some of the information. I think he was telling me that we actually see some of them changing what they're doing to accommodate state law. So,
With respect to things like WUI and sprinklers?
The
Yes,
sprinklers,
Mr.
yes.
Oliphant? Mike?
I have reached out to other building officials in other counties in Northern California, and I've heard it from one extreme that they will not consider the limited density rural dwelling ordinance out of 25, or as we call it, Class K. They will just stick with the minimum California building code as written in Title 24. As to other jurisdictions who have it, but they have amended it, and they have included the fire safe WUI and the fire sprinklers as well.
So they've stayed with the Class K title. I mean, they've continued to use Class K, but they've incorporated standards that didn't exist when they first put it into place.
That is correct.
Is that it?
To be
Yeah.
clear, Marin County is the only other county that I could find that call it Class K. Marin County and Mendocino County are the only counties that call it Class K. The others, Humboldt calls it rural homeowner builders. ordinance, and but if we all call it the limited density rural dwelling ordinance, they all know what we're talking about. But yeah, so that's what I found when speaking with other building officials, that they have amended their ordinances.
John?
Are you aware of other jurisdictions that still maintain exemptions from fire safe standards?
No, I'm not aware of any jurisdictions that do.
Thank you.
Okay. I think with that, I'd like to allow people to come up and address the committee. Oh, good. We have some.
I'd like to make one correction, Supervisor McGowan, just to his question. There was an exception. That was the city of Santa Clara, and because they have a paid fire department within the city, they do have some unusual exceptions, but they have the paid fire department on staff, and legally by code they're not required to have WUI. Chapter 7A in the building code is very explicit as to that.
Okay, I want to thank everybody who submitted speaker forms. The speaker forms are in the back. If anyone else wants to fill one out, you don't have to fill one out to speak. It's just a convenience to me as chair. And I'll just take these in the order they were handed to me and start with Stephanie Gold. Yes, please, and just give your name for the record.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Gold,
Thank you.
Anderson Valley. I'm not much of a public speaker, but I was very much concerned about this. I wanted to come and share some thoughts. So I am a counselor at Anderson Valley High School, and I'd like to speak to the need for affordable housing from my perspective. I know that California Housing Accountability Act requires counties to facilitate affordable housing, and I really see the need at our schools. I know that there are families who technically are considered homeless because they can't find affordable housing, and it's an ongoing crisis trying to find housing for new teachers and health center workers. So I really question the wisdom of requiring expensive sprinkler systems and perimeter foundations and requiring 5 acres instead of 1 for Class K permits. I think we need to be encouraging affordable options rather than putting up obstacles to affordable housing. I urge that you reconsider the proposals and keep your focus on affordable housing as the Accountability Act mandates. And regarding the concern for refinancing and such, it's just nice to have options for builder owners. You know, a person can always choose to go with a standard permitting code, but it's nice to have an option if that's not going to be an issue for them to have a more affordable way to pursue it. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. Okay, Mr. Ward, Scott.
Good morning, Scott Ward, Red Valley, members of the committee, Mr. Oliphant, Mr. Gonzalez. I appreciate what Mike has done here. I think it's an overdue to begin to revisit the ordinances written in 1981. So I'm just going to go down the letter that I sent you with some additional comments. I think the size limit's unnecessary. I mean, how many McMansions were really built? I mean, to change a policy that's been in existence successfully in Mendocino County based on some anecdotal evidence that somebody built a giant house, I don't think really pertains to what we're discussing. If you're going to limit the size of the house, I would suggest it to be 2,500 square feet with additions up to a total aggregate of an extra 1,000 square feet. People have big families. They may have bigger families. They may bring their folks in and need to expand. So that if they have a 2,000 square foot Class K house and they got to take care of their elderly parents, where are they going to go? They got to make their house bigger. You can't have an amalgamation of a Uniform Building Code edition and a Class K house. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I think if you're going to limit the size, make it a maximum of 3,500, the initial house being 2,500, then whatever, successive additions up to an extra 1,000 square feet. The perimeter foundation, I can see Mike's point as a retired building official. I totally get it. I think it's contrary to the intent of Class K for imaginative construction and a little bit of flexibility. People are aware that they have to fill out a deed waiver when they get a Class K house, and it says that the house has not been reviewed or inspected for resistance to lateral forces produced by wind and earthquakes. They're put on notice. Sloping terrain is generally where you're going to have a shear transfer with earthquakes or wind, and I would suggest that you require perimeter foundations for slopes greater than 5 to 1. If you're going to require engineering for post and pier foundations, not only will the foundation have to be engineered, but an architect or engineer to put their stamp on that set of plans will also require that entire house framing to meet current code. Because you have to transfer the shear from the house down to the foundation. You can't just engineer the foundation to resist the shear. You have to engineer the whole thing. That's their duty as an architect or engineer. They have to do a complete structural analysis of the entire building. Inspections, re-inspections, I totally support that. I wish that was there when I was here. Wildland urban interface, I totally support, but the code only requires it in the state responsibility areas. So say the Red Valley floor, the Potter Valley floor, it's not required. So I do support that. Fire sprinklers, they're a good idea to get you out. If you have a spring and you're off grid, pretty hard to make a fire sprinkler system work consistently that you can rely on. The code allows you in 106, I think, for alternate methods of material. I think that should be an option where the applicant has a spring that he can wrap his house on the inside with 5/8 Type X fire resistant sheetrock on the walls and the ceiling. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mike, thank you, Scott. After we've heard these comments, I am going to ask you to reflect on these, so I know you're taking notes while these comments are being made. Very good. Okay, John, did you have a
Well, I had a
question?
question of Scott, but
You know,
I'll let it go.
why don't we take the speakers and then we'll have Mike take notes on what they're saying, and then we'll try to come back to them, because I think we may have some that are repetitious or whatever, but we can gather them all together and deal with them at once. Dennis Tooney. Mr. Tooney?
Yeah, my name's Dennis Dewey. I'm a 35-year contractor in Anderson Valley. And I'm not going to address individual issues because they've all been spoken to. I'd just like to address the, basically comment on the I'm terrible at standing up and speaking, excuse me.
Oh,
All right, so
take your time. Feel free.
the ordinance as written and standing in the community has been a very, very valuable instrument to the community, both the residents and the community of builders who, well, you could say take advantage, but you could also say provide a valuable service to the people that are taking advantage of this instrument. As far as I can see, by reading the proposed changes, I think that the ordinance should stand as it is, because it is a very valuable tool to the residents that you represent and to the building community who live and work here. I think it would ultimately weaken the position of Class K, and I think if these proposals were implemented, would probably ultimately destroy the spirit of Class K and its future, because it seems to be opening the door to swinging the entire weight of the new building codes and new regulations into the Class K. Where do you stop and where do you start? So I don't think that door should be open. I think you could more effectively serve the community by addressing education and encouragement towards visiting fire regulations, visiting structural regulations, maybe even having some type of seminar available to people that are thinking about going this direction. I think that might be a more valuable solution. I just really hate to see this ordinance screwed with, because it's been very, very valuable to the community since its inception. And another quick comment about the insurance issues. I don't think that's your job, you know? I mean, your job is to really let people do what they need to be done. The financing insurance is on the people, you know? You could educate them to the effect that their insurance rate might be going up. They might have a little bit more trouble financing. Although I've been involved with probably 40 Class K residents and involved with the people that I built for, and that's never been an issue for any of them to date that I've heard from. And they talk to me all the time, you know, they become associates. So I'm out of time. Anyway,
Thank
I
you.
would like to see the ordinance stand as is and not even screw with it.
Okay, thank you. Robert Salisbury.
Hi, you guys. I've been a 40-year occupant of Mendocino County and been a carpenter for 35 of those years. And I've worked on plenty of regular code houses and plenty of Class K houses. I'm here speaking in terms for affordability. I could quote from the recent legislation that's come down from California. Oh, geez, of course I don't have it here. That encourages counties to make affordable housing. You guys, I think it's 157, the legislation that just came down. And here you have in your hands, you have Class K, which is a good vehicle for that. I would really like you guys to perceive Class K as an avenue to create or allow, you already have the tool, affordable housing. Some of the things, the interior fire suppression systems that would be required under Class K, well, it wouldn't have saved one house in Redwood Valley or Potter Valley. And the additional cost, I've heard numbers floating around, is not coming down of contractors I've talked to. Interior, just working on the interior of a house is $10,000, and then people have to work on bladder systems and tanks and the water supply. We're talking $10,000 to $14,000 additional cost for these interior fire systems, which wouldn't help in a wildfire situation. Perimeter foundations around houses. I think some people have spoken to that. One thing I'd like to add is that would add the cost on, say, a 1,500 square foot house, according to contractors I've spoken to between $10,000 and $30,000. So between these two things, you guys are increasing the cost of houses by $30,000, $40,000, and yet you're mandated to, and I think are in favor of creating affordable housing. I'd like you to see this as an opportunity to help people who've been burned out of their homes to be able to afford to come back and build here. The fire suppression thing, I mean, trailers, I believe. I mean, we could become a county of trailer houses, you know, because fire suppression units aren't required in mobile homes or manufactured homes. I've read that. And so, well, so people maybe could afford trailers, and owner builders wouldn't be able to do that. We'd lose work for people building the houses. They're created outside of the county, et cetera, et cetera. So I see this
ask
as
you
an
to wrap up if you could.
I see this as an opportunity for you guys, and please think of your constituents who need affordable housing, and look at it from that perspective rather than governmental and other influences on you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. James Badouris, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you can help me.
Hi, my name's James Badouris, and I own Philo Sawworks, which is a construction company over in Philo, of course. I established the company in 1976 and worked during those early years for many, many young people who had moved to Mendocino County and were attempting to build a life here on a shoestring budget. Times haven't changed much since then. We now have many people, young and old, trying to build a life in our county, still on a very modest budget. Class K has been a great benefit to these people, allowing them to build a home that they otherwise might not have been able to afford. We have a tremendous shortfall of homes throughout California, and it's especially exacerbated in our county, which is one of the poorer counties in the state. I strongly urge the supervisors to maintain a Class K as it is, without modification, and support our fellow citizens who need housing desperately. Thank you.
Thank you. Blair Phillips?
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Blair Phillips. I live outside of Willits. I wanted to address Class K and first off appreciate the elders who paved the way, who made it possible, and just note that I'm one of the 3 youngest people in the room, starting off on my land and really struggling already with all the costs that are associated with trying to do things. And wanted to note, I can tell that a lot of the things that I wanted to say are already going to be said, so I'm going to kind of skip to the generalized ideas. And first off, I want to note that Class K is a primary reason that I chose to live in Mendocino County. Secondly, I think it's important to consider that in these times of increasing fire and a sad loss of craft culture, that we remember the proven and successful examples of natural building. All over the world in earthquake zones like Japan and non-earthquake zones alike, buildings are still standing today that are over 400 years old, that are made entirely of wood, mud, stone, without the use of concrete or metal. These places obviously have fires too. And here in California and a lot of the areas that have been destroyed by fire, some of these are natural buildings are the structures that are still standing. The ones that are built out of cob, for example, or really well plastered straw bale with metal roofs. So I'm hoping that instead of making Class K look more like standard building codes, we use the Class K for rural residences to exemplify the inherent and resonant beauty of Mendocino County by leaving room for a renaissance in the natural craft culture. I propose that the board and to the community to start a natural building working group over 2018 that can draft up a proposal of how to make Class K represent the needs of rural people in the hills, and potentially even an overlay of how to look at ways to ease the overburdened housing shortage. I also would like to propose that the amnesty be extended till June, as local architects are overwhelmed with cannabis and fire rebuilds, leading them not to be able to complete jobs when they say. Since 2016, I've worked with 2 different architects who both failed me. I've paid one of them out, and they've delivered me plans that were completely incorrect, and that's a reputable company that I won't name here in Ukiah. And I've been working with the second one who's been dealing with other issues regarding to personal stuff. So in conclusion, let's make Class K something that potentially can be a leader in new ways to find fire-resistant building that don't require expensive situations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your
One
comments.
last thing. Let's make Class K stand for craft culture, kindness to the environment,
Okay.
and keeping it simple.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Darius Richmond. Be followed by Casey O'Neill.
Hi, my name's Darius Richmond. I've been living in the county for about 20 years. I own and operate a restaurant in the Anderson Valley, and It's not a very lucrative industry, the food business. So my concerns center around affordability of building and parcel sizes and things that would make it so younger people would have difficulty in getting established and building a home. I've utilized the Class K permitting process in the past. I've built a Class K building myself, and I kind of feel like for me, for people in my position, building would be kind of unattainable because I wouldn't have the kind of income to hire an architect, hire a contractor. So I'm in the process of designing a house for my family now, and hope to utilize the Class K permitting process to do that. So I came here interested in what the changes would be and how that would affect me personally and affect the community at large. So yeah, my concerns are how it would impact people that don't have a lot of income. You know, I mean, the people that are building those 10,000 square foot houses aren't the people that we're concerned about because they can afford the architect most likely. But yeah, that's basically my concerns are how it would affect people that are in a position where they don't have a lot of options. And yeah, and the house that I live in now was built probably 100 years ago, and it's built way worse than the buildings that I take on, and have basically learned how to be a contractor, and chose perimeter foundation just because that was my personal choice. So you can choose to build fully to the code or not, but that I'd like to have that option and be able to continue to have that flexibility. And yeah, so that's basically my concerns. I'm not open or closed on all of the potential changes, but I'd like just to know what's going on and how that affects me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Darius. Casey?
Good morning, Casey O'Neill, local farmer. You know, one of the things I'm always really keyed into is like making regulations that work, not from a government perspective, but from a human person, people perspective. What we've seen a lot of times is people just build without permits because the process can be onerous. It is onerous. Even with Class K, it's still not a walk in the park. And you know, I have significant concerns that if we want to see buildings built with permits and we want to see people participate in the regulated process for buildings, it's got to be functional. And if it costs too much money, by definition, it's not functional. We are a very poor county. You know, I think calling it the cabin code is dead on. Like, I built a little tiny box, and then when I got some more money, I tacked on a little box, and then I tacked on a box, and now I have a house. And so, you know, I think it's important that we create the opportunity for this type of process and that we maintain it. I think it's been working pretty well, and I'm a little dismayed to see the required upgrades. For instance, you know, I got a quote on a perimeter foundation that was something around $30,000, and that's not going to happen, plain and simple. So I'm not, you know, it puts me in a very awkward position in which, you know, I'd really like to participate, but I also can't do something that I can't do. And so, you know, I'm very, very leery of requiring these significant additional costs, you know, an engineer to engineer my post and pier foundation. You know, at a certain point, you start to say, well, a lot of people I know are just not going to do it. And so it's, you know, I'm really wary of these suggested changes. And I think, you know, there is a difference between something that's already built and something that's being applied for. And that's a really, really important consideration, because if it's already there, it's a lot more difficult to retrofit. When I was a kid, my parents did the full building permit, and I was the guy that crawled under the house to put the backing on the foundation boards, on the frame boards, so that we could pour the perimeter foundation. That was a nightmare. And you know, I think it creates a potential for just flawed policy that doesn't really accomplish what we want. We need people to have places to live, and right now it's it's hard right now. I'm talking to a lot of people who are really, really struggling. So the more that we can, I'd like to just see it left as is. I read the ordinance a couple of times, and it reads like a breath of fresh air. And I think that the significant changes in UBC since 1982 have exacerbated the housing problem in a major, major way. And I'm a big fan of a Joel Salatin quote that says, "If I want to raise my family in a teepee, I ought to be able to." So I think we should consider not adding more onerous restrictions. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Barksdale?
Thank you. My name is Bill Barksdale. I'm a real estate agent in Mendocino County. I've been practicing real estate for over 25 years and have served the county as on the Assessment Appeals Board for 3 years. The original intent, as I understand Class K, was health and safety issues for substandard structures, for bringing unpermitted structures into the fold so that they could be safer for occupancy and for people, and for creating of affordable housing. Some of the proposed upgrades seem to me like a way of kind of changing the code into the International Building Code, which is the code that we use now. And I'm not sure that that's the intent of Class K, although many of the Class K structures have been brought in, many of those have not. As a real estate agent, I still see structures that are unpermitted that need to be brought in and to be made safer. And with the intent, I myself lived in a house that a former owner had built, and it was clean slated, and it was a great house. Did not have a concrete perimeter foundation. It was very structurally sound. I did do some reinforcement of the foundation and so forth, but it was a wonderful house. And I questioned some of the things like the sprinkler systems. I've seen ceiling plumbing in houses freeze and cause huge damage to houses. Sometimes houses are unoccupied for a period of time. I've always questioned the effectiveness of in housing of ceiling installed sprinkler systems. I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. We've had housing for thousands of years without ceiling sprinkler systems. I understand the importance of concrete perimeter foundations. I'm not sure that a 5-acre minimum parcel size may start encouraging people to move into fire zones, wildland areas that are subject to fire-prone type of situations, and I'd like that to be looked at a little bit more. I think the Class K system is a good system, maybe needs some tweaking. I don't know it needs this much tweaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Ellis?
Thank you all for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jeff Ellis. I've been for about 25 years renovating buildings in Vallejo, Contra Costa County, Mendocino County too. The reason I started this business was to make money and to provide for my family, who I moved to Mendocino County in 2005. And I have seen a lot of buildings that were in terrible shape after 100 years of existing in Vallejo, from water dripping in, causing dry rot, causing issues. People still living in them. I often bought them as foreclosures, and I did the stuff that was necessary to make them safe.
Please address the board, thanks.
I did the stuff necessary to make them safe. So I have exceptional experience with dealing with low-income housing as a person that does it as a business. Financing, working with contractors, working with laborers, working with tenants. Some buildings I still have, some buildings I've sold. I have a Class K structure that I renovated in Mendocino in Albion, and I had no problem selling it. There was no problem, even though there was that on the deed that said it was a Class K structure. I live in a Class K structure here now in Boonville, and I have since 2011. wonderful, beautiful building. And one of the reasons it's a beautiful building is because it was allowed to be built with Class K. It was allowed to be built in a way that was safe, and yet it has open space, it has light, and it's sited on the land with another Class K structure. So there's a couple things I want to just hit. Hopefully you understand my perspective as one that's rather educated and is in the trenches. 5 acres doesn't make sense at all to me. And the reason 5 acres doesn't make sense to me at all is because you really need to take some time to ask people and go down to the folks that are a clerk or working at a gas station or in a restaurant. Can they afford 5 acres? No, they can't afford 5 acres. They maybe can afford a few acres with somebody else or with a couple other families. We should not be looking at whether or not we could do Class K. We should be looking at how many buildings can we put on one parcel so that people can actually have housing. That's one of the problems we really face here. We have a lot of people that do not have housing. 3 inspections, I have to say that makes sense. Rough electrical and plumbing along with a final. I think a perimeter foundation is a bad idea because it takes away the opportunity for somebody to build a structure for less money. People have been living and building structures that were post and pier for years. I don't think that needs to be engineered. I think if you give a owner the opportunity to learn about how to build a post and pier structure, as was mentioned earlier, that should be enough. 3 minutes really isn't enough to say what I'd like to say today. Refinancing and insurance, that's up to the owner. That's our decision. Finally, looking at the importance of providing the average person the chance to build their own house and having people come to our county that want to do that, those are the kind of people that we want here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Greg Kraus, followed by Angela DeWitt, and that's all the speaker forms I have. So after Angela, I'll just ask anyone else who has a comment to come forward.
Hi, I'm Greg Kraus. I'm from Anderson Valley also. I'm concerned about this. I actually started in this county, well, actually I didn't start there, but I ended up in Comsey for about 15 years in a property that was cleared with Class K, with clean slate and all that stuff. And we were able to bring the building into compliance, and it was pretty good. It was a neat system. And we couldn't have afforded to do that if we would have done it in the upgrade that you're talking about. So I'm concerned about that. I think that the comments being said over and over again is affordability, and that's what Class K is about. And I think you really need to examine that. That's the most important aspect of it. I think that these things that you're talking about, you could make them online videos, advisory stuff that people could read about, see if they want to do it, see if they can afford to do it. And a lot of the stuff owner builders can do. They'll do that kind of stuff. They'll build foundations, whatever, if they want it. They may not want it. So the other thing I'm concerned about is if you do this, you'll make a bunch of outlaws. There'll be a lot of people that just won't do it. They won't get the permits, and that's not what you want to do. I think that the key is that you want to keep people in the system making good decisions, and if you give them information, they can make those good decisions. So kind of back there again. The sprinkler system, I worked with a client in Comsey who had a sprinkler system on his roof, plumbed with copper pipe, had some big tanks, and that worked pretty well for him. His happened to have redwood shake roof, so it was really important. It really gone up in flames. But if you notice what happened in the fire was started from little fires that appeared. So if you had a very minor outside sprinkler system, you actually could control things. And if you inform people, like our fire districts do, about how to take care of their property to make sure that the trees are cut away from things, that information is really important as well. So let's see, the other thing I wanted to say was, I'm also concerned that if you make this more complicated, you're going to require that the county planning office work harder, and the office is already working a little too hard. It's hard to get the planning people out there to do things, and so I think that's important to look at as well. And I think that's about it for me. The only thing is I really think it's important to advise rather than dictate. Thank you.
It's important. What was the last thing you said?
Advise instead of dictate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Angela.
Hey there, thanks for having this opportunity to talk about Class K stuff today. I'm here to represent the Anderson Valley Housing Association. Our board of directors has written a letter, which I believe that you have a copy of. Did Stephanie give you a copy when she arrived? I just want to make sure that you've got that. It addresses each of the individual points that came up in on the minutes of the last meeting, I think. And so I'm not going to go over those because you can take a look at it in the letter, and also everybody in this room has pretty cogently addressed each of those. So our mission is to provide affordable housing in Anderson Valley, and this is something that's more and more of an uphill battle every day. When I first accepted this job, I spoke with a former supervisor to find out what he thought about it. And he said that our best bet for affordable housing in Mendocino County was the lack of accountability and enforcement, and that people should just kind of build. That doesn't really seem like good policy, but it seemed actually pretty realistic. And the more onerous that Class K becomes, the more that will be a realistic policy. You know, Greg addressed making outlaws, and I am afraid that regulations like this will leave people feeling like they have to be underground, and their houses will be outside the system and less safe. California is known for being onerous in its regulations in general. So rather than trying to align us with the standards of California, we can set an example for the rest of California for being driven by the will of our community. That's something that people come to Mendocino County for, that they stay in Mendocino County for. It's who we are as a people. It's very deep culturally. So it would be nice if we could create some sort of a metric for every change that's proposed for Class K. And every change, if it meets these criteria, will it discourage owner builders from participating in the permitting system? Will it significantly increase the cost of construction? And does it honor the original spirit of Class K? Additionally, I would like to just remind everybody in here that the median income in Mendocino County is $45,000. It's less than $45,000. So when we're talking about it requiring changes that add an additional $30,000 to $40,000 to a building project, what we're really doing is excluding so many people from home ownership. And this becomes a class issue, ultimately. I feel that very deeply. Housing is really deeply rooted in class. So I think that that's pretty much it. Also, I'm not speaking on behalf of this agency, but I am a volunteer firefighter. I've seen enough structure fires that I fully recognize the importance of fire suppression systems in homes. And I would like to encourage the County Board of Supervisors or whatever agency it is that's able to implement such a system, that rather than have this be kind of a punitive requirement, that we can empower people to place those kinds of systems in their homes through tax incentives, through grant programs, through outreach, and that kind of thing. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Just going to ask that anyone else who would like to speak come forward. Look at that.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow supervisors. I didn't know any. My name is Larry Myard. I knew nothing about this until Saturday night late. But I started looking into some information I was given and listening to these other people this morning. I would like to just address some of the issues. I think if you do change the Class K ordinance moving forward, that you grandfather anybody that is already there and existing. I can't see you going retroactive on that. I think that would be devastating. Sprinkler systems, I didn't build one in my house when I built here in the county. If I was forced to, I would have turned it off because it'll do more damage to your house. Then I think save it. In the spirit of Class K, I think it's a cost item that would be prohibitive for most people. Perimeter footings, yes, very expensive. But as a 22-year firefighter, I also know that a perimeter footing will help save a house. A post and pier situation with an open access to underneath the house will almost guarantee you in a wildfire situation your house is going to go. A 5-acre minimum, why? I mean, if you have the capabilities of breaking a piece of property off of your larger piece and allow someone to build Class K, what difference does that make? I think that should be waived. 3 inspections, I think, is good. I think that should be minimal, or the minimum. Square footage, why 2,000 feet? I think that's on the small side. I think it should be more considered more in the 2,500 to 3,000 foot size. But I guess the main thing is the Class K provides is the affordability to people in Mendocino County, and I think that's why some of these things I think are just totally cost prohibitive and unnecessary. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Farnham. I feel like we're trying to strike a balance here between affordable housing on one side and safe housing on the other. And I think there's a way to do it. I understand that post and pier is allowed if the plan is engineered, but then that puts the affordability, so now it's not affordable because you have to pay for the engineer. But we still want it to be safe. So if there's a way that we can take some of these engineering standards and write them into the code, so for example, with limitations on post height and proximity, for example, that would go a long way towards providing an affordable building option with guidelines on how to build your post and pier building. Also, the posts could be wrapped in fireproof materials or fire-resistant materials like corrugated metal or like cement board or other things to increase the fire safety. As far as the sprinkler systems, I would echo what Scott Ward said. We want systems in place for people to escape fires safely, but we want those systems to be effective. If a property is off-grid with low water flow, it makes a sprinkler system harder to install and maintain and potentially less effective, as in it may not actually work when it's needed. Building out of fireproof materials makes much more sense to me. If someone can prove that their house is fire resistant or fireproof on the inside and the outside, it seems they should not be required to install a sprinkler system. Since the fires, I've been in touch with many natural builders, and we've been conversing about the fireproof potential of cob, super adobe, and earth and plaster. I've been in touch with the Cobb Research Institute in Marin, who are currently conducting tests on cob for fire resistance and earthquake resistance. Cal Earth Institute down in Hesperia has already done many of these tests on super adobe style of construction and has been proven more effective than traditional stick frame buildings. I would echo what Blair Phillips said about having a natural building working group as a way to facilitate rebuilding after the fires in a more affordable, safe, and effective way. I'm sure everyone would much rather have a community of fire and earthquake-proof, low-cost, handcrafted earthen cottages than a community of prefab modular homes with less fire and earthquake resistance. I'm currently on an email list with 15 natural builders, some from within the county and a few experts from outside the county, who are talking about all these topics and proposing a natural builders colloquium to be held here to discuss the fireproof potential of natural building and how to get streamlined approval through the building department to rebuild quickly, affordably, and effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there other speakers? Mr. Howard.
Good morning, Lee Howard, North Coast Builders Exchange. I'd like to start off by at least saying that maybe the county missed, and Mike probably went there but didn't scratch it down far enough. Butte County is the only county in the state that I know that has an exemption to the sprinkler system. The only one that somewhat doesn't enforce the fire safe standards. Butte County also has a minimum lot size of 1 acre. They require the sprinklers, you're exempt from sprinklers if you're 1,200 square feet, or 1,250 square feet or less, you're exempt from the sprinklers. That's, again, that's the only county in the state that has done away with this or changed it so these standards don't apply. I'm really disappointed in the fact that you would ask for a legal opinion regarding what the standards are. I think a lot of our discussion here today would be null and void if that opinion was setting out here to see. It's my understanding that the county has no option in the fire safe standards. I've talked throughout the state. Most counties that did or were in this position have gone back and rolled it back the other way into the fact that they've gotten to the fire safe standards. Do I agree and like the building code? No. I think the California National Building Code now, used to be a California Building Code, is one of the most draconian pieces of garbage that's out there. And it's being pushed and shoved all the time by special interest. Every 3 years we rewrite it. And is it going to get any better? No, not unless somebody like the county goes to the International Building Code conferences and argues the fact that we don't need that. But to say that we need to just do away with it doesn't fit the mode. It's the law. And we are a country of laws. I hear today that, we're going to, if you're going to change this, and again, I don't think it's an option on some of these things, whether you change it or not. I think that it's state law, and especially in SRA areas. Now, in the local jurisdictions inside the valley floor where you have LRA, maybe it isn't. But I would really look forward to a legal opinion, and hopefully that'll answer a lot of our questions that are out there for us. Thank you.
Lee, are you aware that Butte County has had any pushback from the state on being an outlier?
I don't think they have. There's one area of Butte County, and I've actually talked to them at length over that has really pushed back. The locals are pushing back even against the county. And I say, all the power to you, but the problem is it's a real losing situation when you're bucking the state on some of this stuff. A couple other things. The sprinkler systems. The sprinkler systems that we're talking about today in this system are not what most people recognize as sprinkler systems. They look at, the sprinkler's going to dump, everything is going to be flooded. They've come a long ways in sprinkler systems. They're not for a fire like we just had in Redwood Valley. They don't do a darn bit of good. I think most people get up here and recognize that. But the single fire, and when you look at this, you have in front of you the State Fire Marshal's presentation, the life-saving effect of those sprinkler systems, you can't argue with. They're there. And then we get into the cost of it. We need 400 gallons of water to back up a sprinkler system. Oh, that's expensive. Well, I just had one that went in above me that they spent probably $30,000 in tanks for the grow area and didn't want to spend anything for a fire sprinkler, 400 gallon. So these are the kind of things that, reality, I recognize that we really have a hard time making affordable housing, but not at the jeopardy of life and safety and the rest of us. And some of the fire safe standards themselves do save and do stop fire. We saw that in Lake County in 2015.
Yeah.
The houses that were boxed and carved out fire safe standards, a lot of them survived.
Okay,
So-
thank you. Thank you, Lee.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Oh, I think we have a question, Lee.
Lee?
Lee, I think Supervisor McCowan has a question. Go ahead.
And so, to the fire safe standards, and you did submit to the committee information from the State Fire Marshal Information Bulletin 16-001,
Right.
and resent the previous information on sprinklers. But I believe your interpretation is that if you're in a state responsibility area, there is no leeway on the fire safe building standards. There might be some leeway on sprinklers, or no?
Again, don't ever get me close to being a lawyer because, just throw me out the door. But that's a legal question that needs to
Correct.
be
Yep,
answered.
correct.
Yes, that's my belief that the fire safe standards, the state CDF crews come around and inspect for the fire safe standards in SRA, state responsible areas, all summer long.
Correct. But then when you get to a local responsibility area, if an area has been designated, and here it may be only a very high fire severity rating, then if that's what it says on the map, there may not be any local leeway.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And we have a lot of the high areas in this county.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to speak or say more or anything else at this point?
I'd like to say one more.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to note that there's certain areas in the county that I don't totally even understand how it's set up, but there's like fire zones, and I live in one of them where I can't get insurance. Even if I had a permitted structure, I can't get fire insurance based on the zone. And I think it's important to note that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And, oh, wow, now we have a lot of people wanting to speak. Okay, I'll give each of you one
I'm
more
sorry, I
quick
just
bite
wanted
at
to
the
make
apple.
one brief comment.
Yep.
I think that there needs to be some effective outreach necessary about the planning and building process, some kind of seminar program, because people don't understand the permitting process, and it's off-putting, and there have been a number of building inspectors in the past that have been intimidating and not cooperative, and I think those building inspectors, I would hope, would have some kind of a training program so that they interface better with the public, so that
Okay.
people can understand how the permitting process works. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And Rainbow? Yeah. Robert?
I just wanted some clarification, please, on this one point. I'm not sure we understand this. It says, Class K ordinance shall state that the most recently adopted version of Uniform Building Code, UBC, would be the operative code. Does that mean that Class K...
Okay, we'll get an answer from Mike on that.
Okay, that's
Okay.
just want some clarification.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you bet. And yes, one more quick comment.
Yeah, quick. Jeff Ellis, thanks. Boonville. I think that one thing that maybe we should consider is taking half a year or a year to make a decision on what we're talking about here, because it does have far-reaching effects into the future of the folks in Mendocino today and tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, I do want to give staff a chance to respond to some of the comments that were made. One thing that I think we can clear up right off the bat, and it came in the question came in several letters, and also Mr. Meyer brought it up this morning, was the question of grandfathering. And I hope everyone understands that existing structures that have applied under Class K would be grandfathered in this new, if there is a new Class K, it applies to new construction. Okay, just to clarify that. Mike, how long do you need? Do you want to take, I would like to take a break at 10:30 for 15 minutes just to give staff a chance to unwind. Do you want to start?
I'd like to respond to after break so I can be organized.
Okay. Well, let me give you that time to organize, and we will take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back at 20 minutes to 11, and we'll hear from staff, and then the committee will talk about some of the input we've gotten. Thank you very much.
Oh, I don't know why that was up.
We're going to go to our chief building official, Mike Oliphant, who's going to respond to some of the comments that we've just heard. And Mike, would you just go ahead with that?
Thank you. I'd like to begin my response by reminding everybody that the primary role of the building department in Mendocino County is to provide minimum fire, life, and safety issues, and that is our standpoint. Having said that, as stated earlier, we will abide by what the board ultimately decides on this. Obviously, the number one issue is affordability. And that's a big concern to all of us. We want affordable housing. We really do. And so with that subjective topic, I'm going to leave that to Nash Gonzalez, our director, to respond to the affordability issue, because maybe he might have some ideas pertaining to that. Having said that, there was some mention of cobbed, rammed earth, pisé, those types of structures. Those are fire safe structures when you use those methods, but they are really not cheap structures. They're expensive structures, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
But Mike, before we leave that, because that is something that's come up numerous times, regardless of the expense, would those kinds of materials constitute fire retardant materials and be allowed under the WUI standards for siding?
So right now, WUI has a website under CAL FIRE, and they have all of the approved siding materials. There are many, many siding materials with the underlayment. And I don't think they would have cob or rammed earth in there. But obviously, that's something we could look at in Class K as an alternative material that would be approved, because obviously that's going to be fireproof. If it's cobbed or rammed earth, we could safely say that.
So would we have to incorporate that into our ordinance as acceptable under WUI? If we did incorporate WUI?
We could have a statement with the Class K if it were a material that conforms with 7A, WUI, or equal to or better.
Yeah. Okay.
Something like that.
Okay. Supervisor McCowan has a quick question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to drive home that one point, that if it can be demonstrated that certain materials are equal to or better the listed materials, then the county could write them into our Class K ordinance as approved materials. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but then you might be limiting those materials. You could. It would be a lengthy list, and we don't know what's going to alternative materials that are going to be developed that people may want to use. But if we amend this ordinance every 3 years with the amending of the California Building Code, we could build that into it.
Well, I'm thinking the way we would write it, our list of materials that we consider equal to or better would not be considered exhaustive, but it would be considered, these specific materials, including but not limited to, are considered to meet the standard of equal or better.
That's a very good point.
So it could be written flexibly that if something isn't on the list, it could still be considered, and I imagine that'd be an individual over-the-counter exercise.
That's a very good point, and I think, yes, that could be achieved.
Okay.
I'd like to bring up Scott Ward's. He had mentioned the 5-acre minimum. He was the first one to mention that, and I won't mention all the other people who were opposed to the 5-acre minimum. That's going to be up to the board to decide that issue one way or the other. He did mention a sprinkler a tank holding size, and I want to remind people that if they have a spring or a shallow well or a low producing deep well, you can get a holding tank that's as little as 250 gallons that would provide all the fire suppression need that you would need for a modest single family residence. The next speaker brought up about amending the CBC every 3 years, and I believe that the Class K should be amended every 3 years also to prevent what we're going through now, just so we can ease into things and amend it as the building codes, just have it built in to the building code amendment. Blair Phillips brought up the craft culture and alternative structures. And I think we can still keep that. We can still keep that craft culture and alternative structures by writing in those siting requirements into the ordinance, and possibly not requiring the engineering of those alternative structures. And we'd have to look into that, how we would possibly do that.
Now, let me just drill down on that a little bit. You're talking about one of my concerns about Class K is if you start to require engineering for every alternative that you use, you're raising the cost out of sight. So specifically, what are you referring to in this discussion?
Well, possibly, if we could see a structure meets wind and seismic loading with shear walls and the proper foundation anchoring, we could determine during our plan check process that that meets minimum standards. And we necessarily wouldn't go to engineering as easily as we would with Title 24 California Building Code.
And might that also pertain to alternatives in terms of foundation?
Well,
because I'm concerned, and I think I might have mentioned this before, with removal of the section which allows, it seems to me, more flexibility in terms of pier foundations, stone masonry, footings and foundations, pressure-treated lumber poles, etc. I'm not sure why we need to take that out of the ordinance as an alternative to the perimeter foundations, which seem to be very costly.
Right, and that section certainly could stay for all accessory structures, or as the ordinance calls it, all appurtenant structures. We could definitely leave that. I don't know about stone and pressure-treated wood foundations, but we could certainly leave post and pier. But inhabitable structures where people live and sleep, I think that the minimum foundation stem wall foundation standard should stay. Annapurna had an interesting idea that I hadn't thought of before, as about a engineered post and pier foundation for Class K. If we had a boilerplate foundation, and of course that would have to be on flat lots, no sloped lots greater than 5:1. But that's an interesting concept.
Well, I guess I still don't understand why those alternative foundations could not be allowed. And again, I suppose it's up to the board to decide that. But on SFRs that are not on these 5:1 slopes, I mean, in Scott's proposed language, a perimeter foundation would be required for slopes greater than 5:1, and for all accessory structures that are over 1 story. But that would allow for alternatives to be used where you're dealing with flat ground. And again, we're talking about affordability. I mean, when I built my first cabin in Mendocino County, it was on piers because that was the cheapest and most expeditious way to go.
Yeah.
And 40 years later, that little cabin is still being inhabited. Now,
Sure.
I don't know if it's being legally inhabited or not, but I know that thing is still standing and people are still living in it. So, I do have some very up close and personal experience with Class K and with alternative structures, and I know, so I'm trying to be as inclusive as we can possibly be so that we meet some of these goals of affordability.
Supervisor Hamburg, I'd like to respond to that point.
Yeah.
So after the foundation stage, after you have dug and formed your perimeter footing and stem wall foundation and poured the concrete in there and you're ready to proceed, how much more concrete would you have used in that footing, stem wall foundation as opposed to the post and pier? And labor also, how many man hours would you have more into that concrete footing and stem wall? And I think if you totaled that, it wouldn't be that different. And we're talking about new structures, not existing structures.
Mm-hmm.
So we have existing structures as opposed to new structures. So we're talking about new single-family residences.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for the engineering on the post and pier is just because you can't transfer that wind and seismic and engineering shear transfer to that foundation on the post and pier unless it has been addressed by a design professional.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're at with that.
Okay, keep going.
Another
I'm sorry.
speak.
Supervisor McCowan.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
To that issue of a member of the public raised, could we build, in effect, the engineering standards into the ordinance or have a data sheet that if it's built to these standards, then that would replace the need for everyone to go out and independently get engineering. And then if they wanted to deviate from what had been included in our information that we're putting out, if they wanted to deviate from that, then they would need engineering. I think you kind of indicated that could be a workable approach.
I thought that was a very interesting idea.
Mm-hmm.
I really did.
So maybe between now, because I am pretty confident we're going to refer this on to the full board, so between now and then, if I would certainly appreciate it, and I think my colleague would, if you would explore further what that would look like if we incorporated engineering standards either into the ordinance or to an appendix that would, relieve the burden on every individual applicant of having to secure their own engineering.
And you're specifically referring to the Post and Pier Foundation?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
And then one of the issues with the perimeter foundation was also fire safety. So the post and pier by itself, that might be structurally sound, but then if it's exposed underneath so that, embers can readily get under there. So I don't know if we're allowing post and pier, do we want to do something that still provides that defensibility against fire?
Well, do you simply require skirting if you're going to do post and pier?
Right. So you would have to continue that vertical wall surface to grade and connected to grade to prevent the embers from circulating underfloor. And you have to do that on any structure now as well. Even
So you'd have to
accessory
do it
structures.
anyway?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you'd have to do it anyways.
But it would leave an opportunity for people to do something other than perimeter foundation.
Yes.
But then when we get to something like Cobb, how would this fit into the picture? There's still a pathway to approve that consistent with everything else we're discussing, to allow that alternative. I think that goes to the same or better standard, maybe?
As far as WUI standards, the Wildland Urban Interface, yes. I'm very confident that Cobb, rammed earth, Pisé, they are all equal to or better than any materials offered in Chapter 7A for those standards.
And there's no reason that you couldn't combine those alternative materials with post and pier if it was engineered properly and if the siding went all the way to grade.
Well, I have yet to see a hay bale structure, Pisé, Cobb, rammed earth that has post and pier. They all have deep, thick footings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
well,
the post and pier is more related to a wood frame structure.
Yeah.
Building code calls that a 5B non-rated frame. Yeah.
Okay. Just want to leave whatever room for creativity we possibly can here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the biggest point I got from Casey O'Neill was the affordability, and I just want to be clear about existing as opposed to new. Okay, we're talking about new construction. The existing structures that are built before this ordinance is adopted will be under the current Class K ordinance. And that's for the board to decide as well.
Hey, John?
Point.
Well, just to refine that point, if someone previously came in, secured a permit, built to the Class K standards, then they're grandfathered in. To use that term, we would not retroactively impose a higher standard on them. What has been very common, and of course people are saying, well, don't make us be outlaws. Well, the fact is many of them did not secure a permit when they built a structure. So in terms of how we currently interpret our ordinances, and I think the way the state fire marshal looks at it, if you have a non-permitted structure and you're trying to do anything with it today, you would be expected to meet the current standards because it would be considered new construction. And are you suggesting there's an option, the board at its discretion could say, we're going to exempt those existing structures that may have been built without a permit, and we're going to allow them to comply with the current Class K standards?
Yes, I believe that you can do that with county council. If you explore that with them, I believe that it could be written into the ordinance
and
as
that may
such.
go back to what leeway, if any, does the county have with the wildland urban interface standards?
That's correct. And speaking as to that, the wildland urban interface standards are governed through Chapter 7A in the California Building Code. And that's an important distinction as to Chapter 9 in the Building Code, which are the fire sprinkler requirements that simply state all new single-family residences shall have fire sprinklers. Whereas Chapter 7A relating to wildland urban interface says all structures within the SRA, the state responsibility area, must have these measures in place. And then they have a list of exemptions. So, for instance, if you have an accessory structure that's more than 50 feet from a property line or 50 feet from another structure, you're exempt from wildland urban interface. If you have an eave, as an example, if you have an eave that's over 12 foot off grade, those eaves do not be protected. So there's a list of exemptions in Chapter 7A that would exempt you from those WUI standards.
Thank you. Nash, did you have a comment?
I think Mike answered
Okay,
it.
great. Go ahead, Mike.
Bill
I'm
Barks.
sorry. I think Supervisor McCowan has another comment.
Well, so I think I hear you saying that the requirement for sprinklers is even more universal and state mandated than the wildland urban interface standards.
I believe they're both state mandated. They're both written into the state law building code, but they come from different requirements, from different chapters.
But Chapter 9, the language that you read, would that apply not only to state responsibility areas and high fire hazard rated areas, but also would that apply to all local responsibility areas regardless of fire hazard rating?
That's an excellent point, and you're right.
Because it seems to be all-inclusive. You will have fire sprinklers.
You're correct, and you're right. So local responsible areas, such as local municipalities and incorporated cities, must have sprinklers.
But also county areas that are local responsibility area.
That's true. That's true. But the WUI requirements would not be required in those local responsible areas.
Unless they were a very high fire hazard rating.
That's right. Governed by our SRA maps that we have.
Thank you.
Bill Barksdale mentioned about the freezing of the sprinkler pipes, and I wanted to mention about sprinkler pipes generally are now plumbed with PEX, and a lot of homeowners are putting in their own sprinkler systems now. You can have a a licensed contractor do that, or a homeowner can also. We have C16 contractors who are guiding homeowners on how to install their own sprinkler systems. And they're typically Aquapex. Aquapex has a molecular memory that expands and contracts with temperature and does not freeze. They also have different systems that recirculate through your toilet. Some of them have antifreeze in them. There are different systems that you can use for your structure that you have. Okay, let's see. Oh, I wanted to make, I think I may have mentioned earlier that all the counties that I have contacted require sprinklers, and I may have mentioned that Butte County requires sprinklers in structures over 2,000, but it's not. Butte County requires sprinklers in anything over 1,250 square feet. So in Butte County is the only county I found like that. If you build a new structure less than 1,250 square feet, you're exempt from fire sprinklers.
Which may or may not be in line with state law.
Right, right. And that wraps up what I have to say, except for I couldn't come to an answer on the subjective topic of affordable housing, and then also the extension of the amnesty period. I can't address that. I'm going to let Nash Gonzalez address those topics.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Nash, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, we talk about affordability, and I guess I want to go ahead and start off on the issue of having the affordability versus the health and safety. And this is more of a policy decision than anything else. We at the planning department understand the issue of affordability. I, along with several others, back in 2009, dealt with the housing element, dealt with the lawsuits, and dealt with trying to work with a lot of the organizations that are out there. And ultimately, one of the issues that we came back with was, in order to do more affordability, and this is a bigger picture, and I think we've talked about this in front of the board, is we really need the densities. And in order to achieve the densities, we really need to look at the urban areas, or we need to look at the areas that have the sewer and the water and the facilities that are there. But with that said, the original intent of Class K was to create affordability back in 1981. And I think, as Supervisor Hamburg, as you referred to it as the cabin code, I think we can also look at it as the forgotten cabin code, because it hasn't been updated to where it needs to be today. We've been grappling with this issue in talking with the fire chiefs. The fire chiefs have a lot of concerns about how the code is today, and how, if it were just looked at a little further, we could prevent more issues dealing with fire. But with that said, as Mike has mentioned, it is, our department will focus on what this committee and what the board wants to do with the updating of the Class K ordinance. Merely, we are just suggesting those items that need to have the attention at this point, because of a lot of the issues that are being faced today, especially with fires, and especially with, I'll say, the changes that we're dealing with. We have a building code that we're dealing with that is a state code. We have no choice but to implement it. And I think what happened in the 1970s and 80s kind of set the tone for affordability and for people to move into areas like Mendocino County that provided for alternatives. But I think as we have more and more urbanism occurring in some of the wildlands, we are putting a lot of folks in I don't want to use the word harm's way, but again, we're now interfacing urban with rural. And I think the concern that a lot of the fire chiefs have is that they don't have the resources to get to a lot of these facilities or a lot of these places as they would in their urban counterparts. So I think affordability is a big topic. It's a policy decision. It is a one that we're very sensitive to. But I think we have to strike a balance between affordability and health and safety. I mean, the reason we have the codes is to protect people. but we could discuss affordability all day long because it is a large topic. And again, I just want to point out that we are very sensitive to affordability because we basically are at 0% vacancy in this county.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think the next step is for my colleague and I to just talk a little bit about these things that we want to see brought to the full board, whether they're areas that we are totally in sync on or not. Certainly, the number one issue, or certainly one of the top 2 or 3 issues, is the fire sprinklers. I think it's very interesting that Butte County came up with an alternative, at least for homes that are under 1,250 square feet. Perhaps that's something that Mendocino County might want to look at. What do you think, John?
Well, I think we need to add another imperative to the discussion. So we're talking about the balance between affordability and health and safety. We also have to bring in their legality. Right. And so that's what we don't yet have, is the definitive statement of what options the county has. And we absolutely have to have that. And, you know, Class K got adopted 35 years ago, and it looks like it's scarcely been looked at since then. And the use of it has expanded. But if it's not in line with state law requirements, I think it not only potentially puts the public more at risk, it arguably creates liability for the county. So we have to have that opinion on what is legal, and frankly, that opinion will either narrow or expand the options that the board has. I'm open to the idea, if we have the option to reduce the sprinkler standard for clearly smaller structures, you can make a little bit more of an argument that people in a smaller structure are going to figure out something's going on.
Right.
So again, we need that legal opinion. If we have it, I'm open to considering that option.
Okay.
I'll say another thing I think we're in sync on. We would like to see staff explore the degree to which engineering standards can be built into the ordinance, either directly as an appendix, so that if the building official can determine that the engineering is sufficient based on the methods and materials that are being used, they don't have to submit their own engineering.
Okay. And if I may interrupt you for a second,
Sure.
that would have to do with the foundation issue, right? Whether foundations other than continuous perimeter foundations were allowed.
Right.
And also, would that be in reference to WUI standards, where, say, other types of siding could be used?
Right. Absolutely. For the wildland urban interface requirements, if we should, those that we know meet or exceed, we would include. But again, the reference would be flexible, so including but not limited to, and just spell out what those methods are, and then maybe again the appendix, because you might say COB in the ordinance, the appendix would better define exactly what COB is that would meet the standards.
Right.
Is that clear enough?
Okay.
So I think we're in agreement.
Okay. Now, another issue that we've been close to agreement on, but I do want to revisit it, is the maximum square footage. And I thought that Mr. Ward had an interesting suggestion of the. Now, we had consensed at a previous meeting in September on the 2,000. And he is suggesting that we go to 2,500 with a possible addition of 1,000 for additions, because, and I think Mike, you spoke to this, that you could not have a Class K structure and then add on to it with a UBC addition. Is that correct or not? Maybe I misheard you.
No, I didn't say that.
So you could do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. But
I believe Scott was talking about a cumulative square
well,
footage.
he was talking about a cumulative of 3,500 square feet.
That was my understanding.
Yes,
right.
that was my understanding.
2,500
as well.
plus plus an additional 1,000, or not to exceed an additional 1,000. I mean, I don't see what the big difference is, frankly, between 2,000 and 2,500, with the possibility of an add-on of up to 1,000. It seems like our real problem has been, people building these, McMansions using Class K, but 2,500 to as much as 3,500 still seems to me to be fairly reasonable. But John, do you want to keep it at 2,000?
Well, I would prefer to keep it at 2,000, and one of the arguments cited in favor of the 2,500 is that, and some have cited 2,600, which they say is the average size of new construction. But I'd be more interested in knowing what is the mean, because that average is skewed by the people that are coming in with a 10,000 square foot structure. So if, again, the initial impetus for Class K was affordability, you're going above 2,000 square feet. You're not building a little cabin on the range. So I would stay with the 2,000 personally.
What if we went to 2,000 with a possibility of an addition being added to that, still utilizing Class K?
Well, it's piecemealing, raising the limit, so you either have a limit or you don't. Well, I guess I would say if the limit was, I don't know, I'll give you, well, and we may or may not agree, but I would allow for a 500 square foot addition.
Mr. Chair?
And I prefer we wouldn't open it up to the public, but that's up to you.
Yeah, I don't really want to either. Excuse me, Scott. Yeah,
I was just going to suggest something for
Yeah.
the board's, for the committee's consideration. Since we're talking about affordability and we're talking about creating opportunities, I agree with Supervisor McCowan. 2,000, beyond 2,000, you start stretching the concept of affordability. But let's say you capped it at 2,000, but you decided that 500 additional square feet for someone, or maybe 800 square feet if somebody wanted to do an attached second unit. And then therefore you can then
detached,
attached
second
because
unit?
a lot of people will do attached units, second units with a separate entry to the home, and 800 seems reasonable for a second unit with a separate entry. So again, with the intent is that you're creating another affordable unit, but it is attached, so it does save you the construction costs of a separate structure, but you now are creating an incentive for second units.
Well, and we would officially call that an accessory dwelling unit, wouldn't we?
Yes, as attached. I mean, under the new
but
regs.
it would have to be intended as a separate unit that would be separately occupied by a different household.
It could be a different household. It could be a family member. It doesn't really matter.
It'd be an independent living unit.
Correct.
Okay.
And again, I think then you achieve the affordability without somebody questioning the fact that you're allowing a larger structure, and where is the affordability? Again, here we've been talking about affordability, we've been talking about housing units, the lack thereof, and we talked about second units several months ago. Here's an opportunity that you can still wrap second units into Class K. And again, unless
so you'd propose something like
if it was done
2,750 cumulative cap or 2,800 cumulative cap.
as long as it's for second units. Otherwise, we go back to what Supervisor McCowan had mentioned, keep it at 2,000 square feet. Because now, again, if you're allowing the additional square footage, you make the finding that the additional square footage is truly for affordable units, for second units.
I think that's an interesting idea. Yeah, John.
Well, so I was going to say, 2,000 would be the cap, but we would allow an accessory dwelling unit.
Of up to 800. Of up to 800.
About 750. Well, I would have said 600. If you just asked me, I'd say 600, but 750 sounds like
That's
a good
fine.
number.
That's fine with me. I can settle for 750.
Did you capture that? He said that's fine with me.
I did. I said I would go for 750.
For the sake of agreement.
Okay. Could we talk a little bit about this acreage, the 5 acre versus the 1 acre, particularly if we're going, my thought was that we would require the sprinklers on the 1 acres, but not on the larger acres. But if we're going to go to, this idea perhaps of the 1250 being the limitation for non-sprinklers, then maybe we could go as low as 1 acre, because we're going to have sprinklers on everything larger than that anyway, whether it's on a 5 acre lot or a 1 acre lot. And I know our current ordinance says 1 acre, correct? And I just sort of hate to see us, backtrack to that extent of, cutting off all those people. And I think several people have said not a lot of individuals in this county can even afford to buy a 5 acre piece of ground, whereas a lot more people can afford a 1 acre piece. And to not be able to avail yourself of Class K unless you have 5 acres really takes a lot of people, totally out of the opportunity. So, Mike, do you have any comment on that?
Yes, I do. Our current ordinance states that to meet the Class K, it has to be zoned for a 1 acre minimum. So you could potentially have a lot that is less than 1 acre as long as it's zoned for 1 acre. So you would need to make that distinction as you relook at this.
But all I'm saying is that in order to utilize Class K, you would need a minimum lot size of 1 acre as opposed to 5 acres.
That's entirely up to the board.
Yeah, okay, John, I know you're not
Thank you,
in
Mr.
agreement
Chair.
on that.
Well, and so currently, you could actually have a 1/4 acre lot if it was zoned 1 acre, and Class K would apply. Is that?
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot that at 1/4 acre.
Well, but you're saying if it is zoned for 1 acre.
If it's zoned for a 1 acre minimum, yeah.
Right, and I think part of our discussion around acreage was if you have lower standards, arguably you may be increasing the danger to your neighbors. The more denser the build out is, but I kind of think we're headed in a direction where the wildland urban interface standards are going to be required and the sprinklers are going to be required. And that being the case, I'm completely comfortable with staying with the 1 acre, but we might have it be an actual acre rather than simply 1 acre zoning. Because when you get down to half acre, 1/4 acre, that's pretty much an urban environment. So is there agreement there that we would stay at the 1 acre, but it would be an acre?
Right, regardless of what the
size.
zoning category of the area was. One thing that we seem to have been able to consent on pretty consistently is the 3 inspections, but I would like a little clarity on what those 3 inspections are. What are the intervals at which inspections would be occurring under Class K?
Certainly. On new structures, they would be a foundation inspection. So prior to placement of concrete, after the foundation has been formed, an inspection would be requested. An inspector would go out there and verify the setbacks to the property lines and to other structures, and then would inspect the foundation that it meets the minimum criteria as stated on the building plans, and then would hopefully give approval to pour concrete. Then the builders would proceed to frame the underfloor. They would plumb the underfloor, put their mechanical and electrical underfloor, keep going, build the entire structure, sheet it, roof it, and then that's when you call for your roughs. The electrical code requires a structure must have its roof covering on it before you rough wire it. So at that point, we would do all the roughs at once: the rough wiring, rough mechanical, rough plumbing, and rough framing in one inspection. After that second inspection, we would do a final third inspection.
Yeah, John.
And I think it'd probably be helpful if that level of detail is included in the staff report that would go to the board.
Certainly, I can do that. At what point would you like me to have the staff report to the board? Is that my next step for you?
Well, I think that's when we bring it back to the board in the form of a amended ordinance. I mean, that staff report
So-
would come with,
So
with
if
that.
I would need to know what your decisions are before I create that staff.
Well, I think we're
Right.
kind of
We're
making those.
getting there.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're generally reaffirming the previous
Yeah.
direction, but we're making some exceptions here to include the engineering and clarify the alternative natural building methods.
And where sprinklers might not be required, and where siding options might be possible.
And then the 1 acre.
The 1 acre.
Staying with the 1 acre minimum, although I would say where we are going down to the 1 acre, regardless of what the state code says, if you're going down to an acre, I would say you would have to have the sprinklers. Because the sprinklers are protecting your neighbors.
Right.
The,
Well, even on the under 1250? I mean, that would be something we'd have to discuss, because what I'm thinking is that for houses under 1,250 square feet, that we would not be requiring sprinklers if that is legal, if we can do that within the bounds of legality. Yeah.
Could I please make a comment? Just to reiterate, the sprinklers are not there to protect the neighbors. The sprinklers are there to protect the occupants of the structure and to allow them exiting time.
Correct.
The WUI is there to protect the neighbors.
correct, but if the sprinklers put out the fire, then it isn't going to spread to your neighbors.
Absolutely. Yes.
You know, the sprinklers, the information submitted by the state fire marshal, there's absolutely no question that based on structures that are sprinklered versus those that aren't, there is an incredible differential between lives lost by occupants, injuries by occupants, and injuries by firefighters. It's like several times difference. So the value of sprinklers, I think, are pretty well established based on experience. And some of the questions that have been raised about affordability and practicality also seem to be addressed by the information from the state fire marshal, and the fact that tank and pump systems are allowed and are feasible. The minimum storage, Mr. Oliphant, you said was 250 gallons. I think Mr. Howard referred to 400. That's not a heck of a lot of water storage, because again, it's just intended as an initial response to first ignition, basically. Is that all accurate as far as you know?
It is accurate, and because those the size limitation of the gallons required in the tank is so low, is because only one sprinkler head goes off at a time right where the fire is. Your entire house sprinkler system does not go off at once. That's what some people think. Just one head.
Okay. What I would like to do is allow some more public input, like maybe 15 minutes worth, before we wrap this up this morning, because the next step will be to take something take something to the Board of Supervisors, where everybody will get another chance to respond to this. But I'd just like to hear, if you can be very brief. I know there's a few people. Scott, I know you wanted to comment. Robert, maybe you wanted to comment on the inspectors. Okay, so Scott, go ahead. Yeah, could you hold your comments to 2 minutes this time?
Scott Ward, Redwood Valley. Fire sprinkler is not a hill that I would want to die on. I do want to encourage the 1250 and less to be exempt from it. Mr. Oliphant is correct. Interior fire takes a while to burn the whole house inside to the outside and then spread to the neighbors. By that time, you're going to have response time from your local fire departments. You really will. It'll take an hour to get to that point. Additions. To do a uniform building code addition on a Class K structure, if that Class K structure is relied on for seismic resistance included with the California Building Code resistant addition, you may have to upgrade the entire Class K structure. So what's the point? I think you ought to be able to allow additions on a Class K structure in addition to encouraging second dwelling units. When you add a second dwelling unit to a property, you're increasing your septic size, your water demand, and other unintended consequences of inspections. I think an addition should just be an addition. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Stephanie?
Thanks for opening this up to a couple more comments. One thing is, I don't want to have the outcome of this really make a big separation between those who are like we've got ours people, we've got our houses, either they've been permitted one way or another way. There's a lot of young families who are starting to have kids and trying to figure out if they can stay and work in Mendocino or if they need to live somewhere else. We want to have some sort of opportunity for them to have theirs and stay here as well. So referring to the sprinklers, thank you for discussing them and trying to come up with some sort of kind of compromise. I want to say just two things. One is that I'm not sure I see the value, I don't see the reason for making a cutoff at 1,200. I understand Butte does it that way, but if it works for 1,200, it would work the same way for 2,000 square feet, in my opinion. And the other thing is, if the value of the sprinklers is that enormous in terms of saving lives, then maybe you need to require every house that's currently up to install them, rather than just new structures. And I think that if that were required, suddenly people would be saying, "Oh, it's not really all that necessary." So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Let's see. Go ahead, Greg and Casey.
Thank you. Greg Kraus, Anderson Valley. Thank you. I just wanted to say two things. One thing is that one thing that's forgotten here, and it's actually forgotten by PG&E as well, is that families are growing into houses more so nowadays, where grandparents are coming in and second grandchildren. So houses need to be bigger to accommodate families. And your program, I understand that you want to keep people from taking advantage of the financial aspect of having a Class K house as perhaps a rental unit. But for building for families, there should be some acclimation for that, some way to make it work. And the other thing I'd like to know is just how do you plan, what is your plan about doing this process? Is it like a month that you're going to, present to the board? What is the time plan so that we can know as citizens if we want to respond at your board meeting? Thank you.
Yeah, I would think this would come back to the board within a couple of months, Greg. Yeah. Casey?
Casey O'Neill. I just had a quick question about the power requirements for the sprinkler systems. When the fire marshal presented, it was a 220 system, which you're not going to be pushing 220 with an off-grid system unless you spend a huge amount of money on it.
Okay, Lee. Maybe Lee's going to be our last commenter. Is there anybody else who wanted to? Okay. Okay, and then Robert. Lee?
The sprinkler systems do come in 110, 220. So it's just part of the industry. It's cost effective when you have 220 to plug the sprinkler system into it. You know, I guess what really makes the difference here is there's been a lot of time and energy spent on these types of things. The State Fire Marshal's office looked at this in depth. If you go back and start reading some of their reports, the amount of time and the changes that they've already made to the fire safe standards and to the sprinklers, I guess I just can't say it loud enough and hard enough, and I don't hear this. It's going to the board, but without, again, county council's opinion. That's got to be something that's just has to be had. We've been at this. Is it this the 5th meeting?
Could be.
5th meeting that we've had. We started asking this question way back then. I'm sorry, but that is the basis for everything we're talking about here today, whether it's the sprinklers, whether it's a fire safety stand. All this dialogue that we're having might have been shortened a whole bunch with the county council opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Robert?
I'd like to address a bunch of things, but just one thing came up in the number of inspections that might be required, changes. I really agree, and in fact, it's required in Class K that electrical be up to UBC requirements. Am I right? Okay. I don't understand the need, and Class K and the state allows us to do the minimum health and safety requirements. That says right in the beginning, okay, of the purpose of these things. I don't understand the reason for extra inspections. I totally agree with the electrical and like that, but it sounds like he included framing. Hello? It sounds like almost the whole, all the inspections needed for a regular house, and I don't understand that, and I don't think there's a need for it. But the electrical, yeah, I think 2 inspections with the walls open is really good. A final, and then that electrical somewhere in there, and mechanical and like that.
Thank you, Robert.
But 3, well, why not as well make it regular code? I just can't emphasize enough that this is actually an opportunity for you guys to aid people for affordable housing. I really want you to balance all these other, health and safety things with the ability for people to build the houses and live there. Because otherwise, you're going to create a bunch of outlaws. You're going to create a bunch of trailer homes which don't require the interior. And I believe you don't have any control about that, right? It's a state or federal thing that, what is it, mobile homes?
Yep.
Manufactured homes?
Please address us, Robert.
I'm sorry. Any of those aren't required. So, boy, it seems we can end up with a county of trailer homes and, outlaws. If you want that, go for it. Otherwise, please try to make housing affordable. It's part of your job.
Thank you. Mike, would you address the inspections regime?
Thank you for bringing that up. I need to clarify that. So that inspection where we are looking at the electrical and mechanical, the walls are all open, the plumbing is finished, the framing is finished, the framing must be finished in order for you to run your electrical. So we're looking at all at one shot. We're walking through at one time, looking at multiple disciplines at once: framing, mechanical, plumbing, and electrical. It's one inspection.
So I don't understand why we're mandating 3 inspections.
Because in our current ordinance, we only require 1 inspection.
Right.
And ultimately, that's the final. Although, when we bring this up, when we're issuing a permit at the counter, we offer people, if you'd like to get every inspection, you certainly can. And on new structures, well over 90% of those people say, we'd like you out there for every single inspection.
And how many is that? Just roughly, how many would it be?
Okay, it could be up to 7 inspections.
Up to 7
Yeah.
inspections, okay. And tell me again, one more time, what are the 3 inspections
That we are proposing
under Class K?
We are proposing the foundation inspection.
Right.
The rough
open-
inspection.
Right.
That in the rough inspection, it includes in that one inspection, the rough frame, rough plumbing, rough electrical, and rough mechanical.
Right.
And then final inspection. Those 3. Those are the
Okay.
3 inspections.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yes, Nash, please.
Mr. Chairman, Mike is absolutely correct. There are a lot of folks when they come in and they apply for the permit, they opt to have, and this is applying for Class K, and we'll call it new construction. They opt to have as many of the inspections as they can. What they're looking at it is, if you see anything that's wrong, tell us. Where we see the one inspection is basically when somebody comes in and says, I built without a permit, I opt to go through the Class K, and then that's when they do the one inspection. But we're seeing more and more people now ask us for the service, even though it's new construction and Class K. And I think when this was formulated as far as the minimum 3, it was based on prior folks utilizing the service. I just wanted to throw that out for the board's consideration.
Okay, John.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair. So 2 questions. One that just came up based on Director Gonzalez's comments. So if someone built without a permit and they come in, they say, okay, I want a permit now, I want to go through Class K, then there's only 1 inspection required. Accurate so far?
Yes, that is accurate.
And then for that inspection, and the house has already been built, the walls are closed up, do we require that a certain number of openings be created to check what the wiring or plumbing actually was?
No, we do not. Although we have electrical testers that we carry with us and we check the final electrical, but we do not require them to open up the walls on
But we would
existing
verify
construction.
that it was, there's a ground wire, et cetera, but.
That's what our electrical equipment, that's how we
was it
inspect it.
properly fastened and all that, where we don't really get
Are the hot
into-
neutrals reverse polarity as such? But that's the beauty of that second inspection while the walls are still open on new construction, is visually seeing the circuits in the wall.
Thank you. And then the second question, the commenter questioned why framing would be inspected. I'm assuming we're inspecting it to the Class K standard, or what's the explanation there?
Well, that brings me to the point. There are still benefits to Class K after these revisions if they are going to be accepted and approved. And one of those measures is that the framing still can be ungraded lumber. You can mill your own lumber on your site and use all of that lumber for framing. So we're going to look at the framing that way. It will not need to be graded. So part of the typical framing inspection is you're going to want to know if there's something wrong with your framing. You're going to want to know at that point.
But the fact that it was recycled, ungraded, home milled, whatever, would not be one of those things that it'd be called out.
It would not, because it would still be allowed under the Class K ordinance.
Right.
We also carry moisture meters with us. With home milled lumber, we check the moisture in the lumber to make sure that as they cover it, it's not going to build up mold in the frame. So we check for a 19% moisture content. If it's above that, we say you can't cover it until it's less than 19%. And people appreciate those things. They appreciate those rough inspections. So it's your last opportunity to catch something before it's covered.
Okay, yes, Nash.
I think Mike knows exactly what the wording is on this, but when we go through a structure that only has one inspection and they're not able to see what's behind the wall, basically the owner is accepting the liability and the responsibility, and there is a notice that is recorded on the title. What we have seen over the last several years is, like Mike has described, they're asking for the service. They're asking for, tell us, is everything okay right here? And so what Mike is proposing is this is service that is typically being offered is now part of the code. So that, again, the issue of ungraded lumber is in a call out, but it's in case there's something there that somebody's not catching, there's a correction notice that says, okay, you've asked us to look at this. This is what needs to be looked at. And I'm trying to think of an example where you may have a framing member that is not installed correctly that could be susceptible to, I'll say, an issue because it wasn't installed properly. And again, it's the service that the building department provides by saying that was installed incorrectly. You may want to look at that. It's there again for people's safety, nothing more than providing that service.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think the next step really is in county council's shop, which is to, pardon me? Oh, amnesty? All right, we could talk about that for just a minute. The board is actually considering the extension of the current amnesty period, which I believe expires June 30th of 2018. Is that correct?
We're discussing extending it to
Right.
June 30th,
Oh,
2018.
to June 30, 2018.
The current amnesty expires on the 31st of this
Of this
month,
month,
but
okay.
the board has had discussions about extending it to the end of the fiscal year.
Okay.
And again, one of the things that
Well,
was,
yes, correct.
I was going to say, one of the things that has been raised is the grandfathering in of structures. If somebody comes in today and says, I'd like, if the board decides to extend it until June, then if people come in and say, I'd like to go ahead and apply for the amnesty under the standards today, then they would submit the application. They would be under the current standards.
Right. And when will we be making that determination? Is that on a upcoming agenda?
For the
No.
amnesty, I
Set
would
on the
expect,
19th.
Frank, County Council may know, but I would think that that issue could be on our agenda as early as the 19th, possibly. Doesn't seem like it's a difficult thing to do to formalize the extension of the amnesty. We
can do that.
previously did it.
You can do that on the 19th.
As long as staff can do it, we're good.
Okay. Yes, Nash?
I may add that as far as the extension, the board can just give direction on the 19th to extend it.
Okay.
And
Okay,
that's
good.
where we'd be at.
Good.
At that point, we would then republish the notification and
Okay.
post it
Okay.
and put it on our website that the board has extended it to June. So
Okay.
it's pretty simple.
One other issue that's been raised with the current ordinance is that it only requires that the structure that is built be retained by the owner builder for a period of, I think it's 1 year. Is that correct?
That is correct. So it states you cannot rent, sale, or lease the building within 1 year of the final.
Mm-hmm. And is there a good reason for leaving that at 1 year? I think the person who brought it up to me thought that should be 3 years, perhaps.
I think 1 year is appropriate because I believe that the current Title 24 state law still has that written into it.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, John? Yeah, you have
Thank you.
Yeah.
Presumably, however, there might be an allowable exception for the accessory dwelling unit that we've discussed.
The exception would be
Well, if the owner builder has built their 2,000 square foot structure, and then they either simultaneously or subsequently build a 750 square foot accessory dwelling unit, you wouldn't require them to have both as their primary residence, would you?
You're right, and that was a little bit of a curveball thrown, but you're right. So we would have to address that in the staff report.
Right. So I'd like to nail down a bit the county council opinion
Right.
because we've requested an opinion. Typically, the opinions of county council are privileged. That can be waived by the full board. So whether it's sponsored by the committee or the executive office, it seems that it would be pretty easy to put together an agenda item that would allow the board to make a decision to waive the confidentiality of the opinion related to the wildland urban interface standards and the sprinklers.
Standards. Yeah.
Because I think that just needs to be part of the public discussion, I believe.
And the other thing that I wanted to ask of county council is, when do you think we could have such an opinion? I mean, is it something we could look for in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? What's your current estimate?
So I think we could bring this back to you in January. And again, it's something we might have had today, but as you know, with the various things that we've been involved in, we've been set back on many goals, so.
Okay, so you're saying that the opinion could be in the hands of the board and presumably the public by the first week of January, the second week of January? Just, I'd like to have a date.
I'd say the second week of January, and the reason I'm pausing is I know Mr. Kudrowski takes time off during the holidays because of his children being at home, so.
Okay, so can we just look on the calendar and just say, so we'll have that by January 10th or January, just so we have a date that we're looking at.
You just.
Yeah.
So I'm checking with Mr. Kudrowski. He's stating, I mean, we could probably have it to the board by the 9th or the 10th, but that doesn't give you time to notice it, I think.
Well, and then subsequent to that, we will have a agenda item before the board.
Correct.
But the shaping of that agenda item will be, will be dependent to some degree on what that opinion is.
Of course, and then that would help planning and building in terms of their staff report as well.
Right. So if I could just ask the CEO, do you have an idea of when this might fit on an agenda in January or February?
We will be, I would say, we're still looking at the public health declaration. We've asked for that to be every 4 weeks. So I say that because I'm not certain if our first meeting will be January 2nd or January 9th. And so that will lay out the whole schedule, as you know.
Okay.
So I think it would probably, can I safely say early February? Is that too late, or?
Well, could we say first meeting in February?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, we could say that.
Okay, and we don't actually, do we know what that?
Carla put together a very nice draft schedule, but we are still waiting to see.
Okay, but that does give the public an idea that we're looking at probably the first week.
We could say the first meeting in February if that works for the standing committee. I'm looking at your colleague up there.
Yeah, okay. John, do you have a?
Well, I want to come back to, it's kind of a three-part issue. One, securing the approval of the board to make the opinion public. And I've suggested either the committee or executive office could sponsor an item for the 19th, which I think could be on consent, very briefly laying out the issue and why it's appropriate to make that opinion public. So that, I think, could happen on the 19th. It's a very simple item. I'd volunteer to draft it if that helps. And then secondly, county council will produce the opinion, which we're told will be available in January. And then thirdly, we would have the full board agenda item in February.
Yeah, that lays it out very nicely. Thank you. So, so for the 19th, we would have the opinion. I'll work with county council since this is a legal opinion.
Well, you wouldn't have the opinion. You'd have the request to the board that when available, the opinion be made public.
Yeah, that's fine. And then also extending the amnesty will come forward on December 19th. So then you would have a standing committee in January where the legal opinion would come forward. Is that what you're thinking?
No, I think
so.
This whole issue from here, it will go straight to the board.
Yeah, I think the standing committee is
okay.
To pass this on. This hot potato now goes to the board.
Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you.
And there's one issue still related to amnesty that I think involves a legal opinion also, and that is, typically amnesty, you have your structure that you built without a permit, you come in, you apply for amnesty, but I believe we currently require that you meet the current standards that are in place the day you apply for amnesty, rather than the day that you built the structure, which could have been decades in the past.
That is correct. If you apply for the amnesty, you're applying for the standards that are in place today. And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would either be the UBC, or the CBC, or the Class K.
That is correct. We honor the application date, and if they choose to go with the Class K, we honor the current Class K or the current California Building Code.
And is that something that's enshrined in state law, or is that something that there's an option to have a different approach locally?
I don't know if that's written into state law or not, but I know it's been the policy of planning and building for a very long time.
Because the question that I believe has been raised, some people would like a grandfathering in effect of, gee, I built it in 1985, can't I use the Class K standards? Or it could have been in 2015, can't I use the Class K standards that are currently on the books? That's what's being requested by some.
If I may,
Yes,
I think the
Ash.
grandfathering in is basically accepting what's there and not putting any new requirements on them. But it has always been the intent of the department, and I believe it's the intent section in the building codes as they're adopted every 3 years, that you go by what's in effect at the time that an application comes in. So let's say that the board extends the amnesty until June, and this ordinance is brought forth to the board in February, and the board does take action. It becomes effective 30 days thereafter. So we're looking at March. So anytime after, let's say, and I'll just use after the April 1st, then anything coming in, even under amnesty, would be subject to the current building code or the new Class K ordinance in effect. I think if folks want to grandfather something in, they need to get into the process today. But it doesn't really allow for people to go back in time to when they built the structure, mainly because codes change so much. We do have a position in the county that pre-code structures or anything that was built before 1974, but since that date we've adopted new versions of the code and change, and so anything that's always been grandfathered in or non-conforming, we say if it was built on such and such date, then it is non-conforming. Anything after that date has to comply. So again, as I've said, if anything comes in after April 1st, then anything that was built before that is non-conforming and would have to conform with what is in effect as of the new code, unless they get in and apply now.
Mm-hmm.
Just to
So
keep it
again,
simple.
the application date would be the operative date.
The day that it becomes effective.
Right.
Yes.
The application date for the amnesty for the building which was built without the permit.
So when the building comes in, if it comes in today, it is basically subject to the codes that are in
That
effect
exists
today.
right? Until whatever time an amended code becomes operative.
Then we go with the new code. It's just like when we're now operating under the 2016 California Building Code. Anything that comes in today, whether it was built 20 years ago or today, it's subject to the 2016 code.
Right. Okay.
So what happens in a case where our current Class K allows us to exempt a lot of the wildland urban interface standards? However, going back to 1992, we may not have had the legal authority to make that exemption. So then if we go by our ordinance on the books, you apply before we change that ordinance, you're exempt by our standard. But what if the state actually mandated those standards in 1992 or any time subsequent? Would we have the authority to exempt people from those state mandated standards? So that probably needs to be part of the legal opinion as well, so I hope
That
county
is
council
correct.
was paying attention to that.
That is correct. If it has been determined that they are subject to those standards, then it's out of our hands. But if it wasn't, then we move forward as business as usual.
Yeah.
So it might go back to, you know, if those standards took effect at some point in 1992, then people who can demonstrate, well, no, because it gets confusing, because we're considering the date of construction to be the date of application, aren't we, for amnesty?
It is the date of application. It's when the application comes in is basically tied to date of construction.
So even if they built something in 1991 and the wildland urban interface standards were not yet in effect, but they come in today and apply because they never got a permit before, then they might have to comply with those wildland urban interface standards.
They may, and again, this is something that we're going to have to talk to council about, because as of today, they would be subject to the current Class K ordinance, which didn't subject them to it then.
Right.
But if they do apply for building code, what I call the California Building Code requirements, they are subject to those requirements. That's why a lot of folks who build without the benefit of a permit and they come in today, they are given those choices: either go through the building code and go through that process, or go through the Class K. A lot of people choose the Class K because it's going to be much more affordable and less erroneous, especially when you have to open up walls and you have to show how you've done this, and then you have to show how you've complied with certain standards outside of the structure. That's why people have gone in those directions. If they come in after the Class K ordinance has been amended, they will be subject to the standards of the new Class K ordinance.
But as we're discussing now, even if they come in, you know, for the previously non-permitted structure, even if they come in now, even though our current Class K ordinance wouldn't require it, they still might have to comply with the wildland urban interface standards based on state law.
That is correct.
But
It
that
may.
would be only if the state were to become cognizant of that and come in and force the county's hand.
That is correct.
I mean,
Well, isn't it, if we know that's the state standard, isn't that what we are obligated to require? Now that the question's been raised, can we pretend
well,
ignorance?
let's pretend we didn't raise it.
These meetings,
Okay.
unfortunately, are being
Yeah.
recorded.
Right. Yeah. So with that, I think we're going to wrap this up, and thank you everybody for coming in. And as you heard, we will be getting an opinion in early February, and be bringing this in early January, and bringing this back to the board at our first meeting in February. And John, you got a final comment?
Well, I'd like to try and reiterate what I think we've directed, and then have staff correct me if I've left things out or
Well,
misstated.
why don't we have staff quickly state what they think we've agreed to? Might be quicker.
Well, it might not. I've
I
got a
would
list
like
I could run
clarification.
down.
So we're on, should I wait to start to prepare the staff report until after December 19th, or will we have a complete legal opinion?
December 19th is only going to be, does the board want the opinion to become public? So I would suggest maybe waiting until you have the legal opinion before
Yes.
you write your staff report.
Okay.
And that's what we'll do, is we'll wait for the opinion, and we'll formulate the staff report and recommendations, so that, and I think with the opinion, we'll be able to address Supervisor McCowan's comment on the fire safe standards that go back in time.
Okay.
So again, I've got like
Very good.
half a dozen
Okay,
points
go
in
quick.
bullet point form,
Quickly.
if I may.
Okay.
Incorporate engineering standards. I'll put my glasses on. Recognize alternative building materials that are equal to or better than, including but not limited to, and then list those examples we know of. Recognize a 1 acre actual parcel size,
Right.
2,000 square foot limit with an additional 750 square feet as an accessory dwelling unit, which triggers a little discussion by staff. Exempt 1,250 square feet and under from sprinklers if allowable. Amnesty would apply, and of course the county council opinion. And I think
And
that,
three inspections.
and 3 inspections. Yeah, the balance of items not mentioned here, it's as previously discussed and recommended.
Right.
Sound accurate?
Yeah.
And then please correct me if I've misstated something from
Does
your
that-
understanding or
Does
left
that work
something
for you,
out.
Mike?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, okay. Nash, you're good.
Yes.
But just to be clear, I'm on hold until I
Yeah.
can get legal clarification on this.
Until we get the opinion from county
Right,
council.
and because it will take me some time to present and draft this ordinance.
Right.
And depending on the opinion, it might simplify
Yeah,
a
it
side of that.
might be really quick.
Right.
Okay, thank you all very much. We're adjourned.
Bingo, almost on the